This particular video is going to be focusing on production consoles. We've already talked about the broadcast or on-air consoles and the characteristics associated with them. Now it's time to turn our attention to things that related to production consoles. So we're going to quickly move to the PowerPoint, identify a few things, and then we will go ahead and take a deeper look at actual broadcast console. So first off, let's talk about production consoles. Key thing, obviously, they're used for production and post-production, which is really quite different from what we might see for the broadcast or on-air consoles. This labeling isn't meant to trick anybody, obviously. And one of the things that we want to keep in mind is that the broadcast consoles are set up for that purpose, but production consoles are set up for being adaptable to a variety of different tasks that might need to be accomplished or contexts for recording. The key thing is they're made to be versatile. So they handle a lot of different sound sources, and by that we mean that any one of the channels is often set up so you can handle, let's say, a mono microphone input or a line input. It's not just one or the other. That wasn't the case with the on-air or broadcast consoles. They were a mono input, period, a microphone input. That's it. That's always going to be a microphone input. A stereo electronic source input, it would be always designated for that. There wouldn't be any switching around. But in a production console, these channels are designed so that they can be adapted to different kinds of inputs, and depending on how many you need, you have some flexibility that will work things through. Now, they're also able to send and receive signals to outboard processing gear. And when we talk about that, we're talking about like reverb units or delay units that are perhaps in racks, and we can send the signal to the unit and then take a return from the unit and mix it in with our signal that's coming into the console. So it's a little more flexible in that regard. We also can do some in-channel signal processing, and by that we mean perhaps adjusting equalization on a particular channel, boosting or cutting at different frequencies on a particular channel to control the sound of a source as it's going through the board. So that's something we don't usually see in a broadcast or on-air console. And then finally, to talk about here, we're not going to get into depth about submixes, but it is important to keep in mind that a submix is a special setup where you can take several microphones at one time that might be set up around something that can be controlled together. So let's say if we have 6 microphones that are to record a drum kit, but we don't want to try to move those microphones up and down, all 6 of them. It might be very difficult to raise and lower the sound of that drum kit. So we might do a submix so that all 6 of those feed into 2, and those 2 control left and right the stereo sound of the drum kit. And so it's a lot easier to control the overall 6 with just 2 sliders, and that would be controlling a submix of other instruments or other sources. So that's a submix. But again, we're not going to go into a lot of detail about those in the course, but it is important to recognize what it is, right? Okay, so let me move to the next thing, and that is really talking about some examples. We've got a production console called the Onyx 1220i made by Mackie, and this is a console we'll dig into and learn a little bit more about because it's a great example of a production console. It's small, though, and easily controlled, and it offers a lot of these same kinds of items we're talking about here in that compact setting. So it's easy sort of to pick up, and it's not as intimidating overall. Because sometimes you look at a production console and it's got 24 channels, and it can be pretty intimidating to look at. I want to highlight a couple of things really quickly, and that would be how this kind of console is set up. We've got a little schematic or illustration here to make it a little bit easier, and then we'll turn to the actual video of the console itself. But you can see here, looking at what is in essence the upper left-hand corner of the console, and you can see that right away it looks different from a broadcast console. We've got our XLR input that's easily accessible. We've got a line input which is the one that's called number 10. So that means we have a 1/4-inch jack that could be plugged in there, and it could be a microphone on a 1/4-inch, but it also could be something that's set up like a guitar. And if it's a guitar, we would put the button that's right below it, button 18, and it would adjust the input so that it could accept a line level from an instrument like a guitar or a keyboard or some other kind of instrument like that. Just below that, number 19 is what we can see as a high-pass filter. And that's something that we're familiar with because of the microphones we've been working with. But here's a situation where they have it on the console. We can plug it in very quickly there if we don't have a high-pass filter on the microphone that we're using. So that's beneficial. Right next to that, number 20, is the 48 volts. 48 volts is the phantom power that needs to be sent down to a condenser microphone. And then right below that, there is a dial there that is called gain. And unlike our broadcast console, this kind of console allows us to take the signal in and then give it a little extra boost before it goes through the rest of the channel, gets to our slider, and then goes out to our output. So there's a little extra control here that wasn't evident in the on-air or broadcast console. Just below that gain, there's another section called EQ. Now, EQ allows us to change the signal of that sound that's coming through the channel across the frequency spectrum. It's a very limited opportunity to control it. What we see is the one control that's stationary. It's set at 12 kilohertz, and you can boost it or cut it. That's number 24. Number 28 is the low frequency boost or cut. So that means we can boost or cut at 80 hertz. And then in between, they've got 25 and 26, which are two adjustments that work together. One allows us to choose a frequency in the mid-range to boost or cut, and the other one is actually the boosting or cutting. So it lets us increase or decrease the amount of signal in that frequency range. So this, of course, really quickly gives you an idea that a production console is more complicated and more flexible, more versatile than a broadcast or on-air console. In the next video, we'll look more carefully at an actual Mackie console, and so that you can see the full console and what the different elements are and recognize the differences that it has from, say, the Air 1 that you've been working with.